This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 4 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It was a chief military spokesman who said yesterday that the Israeli Air Force is concentrating on damage, not accuracy. Not the defence minister, as I said a moment ago. But the point obviously stands, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari. And here's the thing, all right? We're going to try again to walk the tightrope today. I was listening to Nick interviewing someone who I think was in Benjamin Netanyahu's office. I was kind of walking into the office upstairs when it was going out over the radio, and she was explaining that some of the concerns the outside world may have about collective punishment or innocent people in Gaza being utterly unable to avoid the missiles being rained down upon them. And she was saying that we don't need to worry because they're given plenty of warning and they know exactly where the targeted areas will be, and there is absolutely nothing to stop them getting out. Not getting out of Gaza, which is close to impossible, but getting out of the targeted areas. And bizarrely, when I sat down and opened the paper, I page 4 of the Times, with those words still, that interview still being conducted on the radio, I read the Israeli Air Force is concentrating on, quotes, damage, not accuracy, end quotes. Its chief military spokesman said yesterday, as jets reduced swathes of Gaza to rubble, killing hundreds of people. And that's scary. That is scary. When you have an actual military spokesman, a rear admiral no less, describing the prioritization of damage over accuracy in one ear or in your eyes, while in your ears, a spokesperson from the Prime Minister's office insists that it's possible for innocent civilians to evade this carnage by heeding warnings based entirely on accuracy. Someone's not telling the truth. And yet they're both on the same quotes side, end quotes. And it adds to a sense, doesn't it, that as we reel from revelations about what has gone on in Israel, particularly overnight in a kibbutz and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it, in Kfar Azar, when Anshel Pfeffer reports for the Times today in graphic detail and focusing upon what is established, the stuff that is merely reported, that is not double-sourced or proven, will be put in quotes. Other news sources have been somewhat less responsible. But as you reel from the discovery of babies' corpses, some debate at the moment about just how brutal their killing may have been, no debate at all about the existence of babies' corpses. As far as I can tell, no dispute whatsoever about that. You reel from that and you reel into this bizarre claim that you can avoid the missiles by fleeing, but the bloke representing the people firing the missiles or dropping the bombs says we're concentrating on damage, not accuracy. So just bear that in mind this morning. Bear that in mind this morning, because what is happening now is inevitable, or seems to be inevitable. But it's almost a conflation of attitude. So Hamas killers felt that they were somehow striking a blow against Israel as a state, as an institution, as a phenomenon, by killing completely innocent children. And now Israel will strike a blow against Hamas by killing completely innocent children. The idea and do you know that 40% of human beings in the Gaza Strip are, I think, under 14, not even under 18. Previous attacks have completely skewed the population in some ways. But you just almost feel now that a deliberate attempt is underway to cast the civilians who are going to die as being somehow, I wouldn't go so far as to say deserving, but as being necessary collateral damage. And if you can step back for long enough or step back far enough to recognize humanity, then there are no sides. Humanity is non-negotiable. There's no hierarchy of humanity. There is no child worth more than another child because of an accident of geography or birth. And that's where we are now. That's where we are, the third day in a row when we have been talking about this issue, and the killing of children has become almost normalised, and it's far from over yet. Some reports suggest Israel will be embarked upon its current campaign for weeks, a lot longer than any previous responses to previous atrocities undertaken by Hamas. And that's the bit I can't get past. I don't know whether I end up upsetting everybody or nobody when I say this, but if you are prepared to tolerate the death of children in pursuit of your cause, it seems to me that you kind of inhabit a place I don't know that I'll ever be able to go to. I get the odd weird message saying, and it, imagine if your children had been raped, how would you feel about this, that, or the other? And I said, well, I wouldn't want to countenance the killing of children who had absolutely no relationship whatsoever with the rapist. I don't understand these questions. You try and bring geopolitics, you try and bring international relations down to individual anecdotes. It just seems weird to me. But that's the bit today. We've come at these issues from a variety of angles. We've been blessed, if that's the right word, by astonishingly well-informed and conscientious callers. But no one, I don't think, can make sense today of Nick being told by a member of Benjamin Netanyahu's office that people in Gaza don't need to worry about being killed because there'll be plenty of warnings in place and they'll be able to get away. While in this morning's newspaper, the senior spokesman, the senior military spokesman for the IDF literally uses the words damage, not accuracy. If you're prioritizing damage over accuracy, you, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, 0345 6060973. If you're prioritizing damage over accuracy, then you are essentially countenancing the killing of civilians, aren't you? Aren't you? I don't know. That's a question. I think you are. That might be dishonest of me not to tell you where those words lead me. But there it is. I'll have a look at some of the early texts. This is from Tamina. Absolutely, James. Whatever side of the fence you're on, it's all unconscionable. Chris in Colchester says that's what happens in wars, James, when aggressors try to invade other countries, like the London Blitz. To be fair, Chris, no one was trying to invade the UK at the time of the London Blitz. They were just trying to inflict damage upon an enemy in a war being conducted in continental Europe. But it was obviously on Hitler's wish list. Israel would never, in capital letters, wish to kill indiscriminately in the way that Hamas terrorists do. So what does prioritizing damage, not accuracy, mean then? From the Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, the chief military spokesman in Israel, we're prioritizing damage, not accuracy. How does that? I'd love to believe you. Israel would never wish to kill indiscriminately in the way that Hamas terrorists do. But what does prioritizing damage over accuracy mean? I'll meet you halfway. I don't think Israeli soldiers would march into nursery schools in Gaza and kill children. I really don't. And if there's evidence of that having happened, I'm sure someone will share it with me imminently. So you can make a form of value judgment, a hierarchy of killing, if you like. But I don't think you can claim anymore that there's nothing indiscriminate about a force that is officially boasting about prioritizing damage over accuracy. I can't get past that. I'm sorry. I just because it was the juxtaposition of the two positions in the same space. Literally the first things really that entered my head. I listen to music now on the way into work in the morning, not the news at times like this. I don't know whether that's a mistake, but we've all got to look after our own mental health. So I listen to music. I was listening to Bach's cello concerto. There's an astonishing new recording by Yo-Yo Ma, which has like sounds of nature playing in the background. You can hear a brook babbling and birds singing while he's absolutely smashing Bach on his cello. And so I've been listening to that. I get into the office, I take my headphones off, I sit there and I open the paper, I read the Israeli Air Force is concentrating on damage, not accuracy. Its chief military spokesman said yesterday, and I hear a member of the Prime Minister's office, of Benjamin Netanyahu's office, on LBC, on what I think of as my radio station. It's all right, I'm good at sharing. And she is insisting that you can not worry about the death of innocent civilians because they get the invitation, the opportunity to flee the targeted areas. The targeted areas. But we're prioritising damage over accuracy. So, I mean, I don't have the questions ready that I have had on previous days today, and I know, rely on you to, or at least the massive majority of people listening to engage in good faith in this conversation. The thing that frightens me most now is the almost casual conflation of people who have nothing to do with the terror attacks, the brutality in Israel, are now going to essentially be punished for it with their lives. But here's the thing. Who's surprised? Who is surprised by Israel's response to what Hamas has done? Who is truly surprised by it? This is probably the only area in which you would find something close to unanimity. You'd certainly find consensus. What did you expect Israel to do? You expected them to do this, and you expect them to continue to do this, and they are doing this. And given the horror that we've been detailing over the last few days, many people listening to this will come from a position of you can hardly blame them for doing this, but that's a moral judgment. And devoid of moral judgment is a simple intellectual question of what did you expect to happen? Well, I expected this to happen, and you expected this to happen. And crucially, Hamas expected this to happen, which is why we will begin today by returning to a slice of the territory that we discussed yesterday, but we'll broaden the question out to any answer that you have. So, given the inevitability of Israel's response to the Hamas atrocities, why did Hamas do it? 0345 6060 973. Thoughtful answers, please, but I'm not going to pretend that anyone will be able to go definitive. We looked at the possible sort of deliberate provocation of uncontrolled rage yesterday. It was rather well expressed by William Hague and some others, but there will be other answers to that question. Why? I mean, and of course there'll be answers that come from completely different places, and it's my job to marshal those answers in a way that won't cause unnecessary offence to anybody. But why did they do it? If you want to use simplistic analogies, it's poking tigers, isn't it? So you knew, everyone knew, nobody listening to this surely is sitting there. You might be shocked, but you're not going to be surprised by what happens, by what is happening, by what will happen. An all-out invasion is the most likely tactic. That is according to reports and an expert analysis. Indeed, the Times headline says all-out invasion is most likely tactic in bid to crush militants. So no doubt Grant Shapps and other Tories will be queuing up to condemn Rupert Murdoch for deploying the word militants in his coverage of this rather than the word terrorists. I use the word terrorists because I'm allowed an opinion. There it is. An all-out invasion is the most likely tactic in bid to crush militants. But no one's going to be surprised by that. There are some reports that Hamas leaders are split over the decision to kidnap women and children. One faction wants to release some. Another faction categorically doesn't. Another faction has said they'll kill one live on television every time a bomb drops. So why do it in the first place? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 18 minutes after 10.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10. A couple of contrasting texts just to set the tone for the conversation that we're having and to stress once again the the thinness of the tightrope that we try to walk together at times like this. I shall read them both out. They arrived in the same 10-second window from mobile phone numbers. If Hamas expected this response from Israel, maybe they wanted the world to see the real face of Netanyahu and his desire to eradicate Palestine. They would have known Israel's response would have been bombing on a biblical scale on the tiny state of Gaza. And this, Israel has no choice but to defend itself, because if they don't, Hamas will be free to access the world and murder anyone they like, including you at your comfortable desk at LBC criticising Israel. Good luck with that, you absolute fool. Israel only wants peace. So that's my job today, is to broadcast to both of those people, in the knowledge that you can never please all of the people all of the time, but on days like this you wonder whether you can please any of the people any of the time. But we owe it to the people already dead and the people about to die to have a conversation, at the very, very least. So let's try. Annie's in Kilburn. Annie, what would you like to say?
Yes, hi, James. One of the things I admire about your programme so much is that you manage to take geopolitical, complex, emotional and horrible situations and turn them into a debate worthy of a lower fifth common room. I'm
sorry, was that an insult?
Yeah, it was
sorry.
actually.
So you were
managed to reduce things.
Okay.
Well, anyway, let's take your ego out of this for a second.
Well, then don't talk about me the minute you come on the radio.
But it's your programme, James, so you have to take responsibility for it.
I know I am, but I didn't realise, just for people listening, you were being very clever when you pretended you were paying a compliment, but actually it was an insult.
Let's not make this about you.
But all you've done so far is talk about me.
But James, it's your programme.
I haven't got the energy. Sorry, Annie. Mark's in Crouch End. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Mark.
My point is that with the response from Israel, it appears to be a very, very emotional response with the seizure, the cutting off water, electricity,
etc. Who can blame them?
I agree. Who can blame them? But I think the whole thing is where you have these Hamas terrorists, it's effectively a punishment, a collective punishment of everybody in Gaza. So I think there needs to be
there was no discrimination in Israel at the weekend either, was there?
Yes, but you can't blame every single resident in Gaza for that. Surely, that's just unreasonable.
I can't, but I can conceive of people who do.
Okay, so if you move along the argument where because of this atrocity, let's call it for what it is, let's punish every single resident in that area, and then the Israeli government appears to be thinking with their heart.
This is where we will begin and end this conversation, with people who believe and people who profess to believe that the Israeli response will be discriminate and careful, versus people who do not believe and who profess not to believe that the Israeli response will be discriminate, which is why, in many ways, I'm not sure any of us will get past the juxtaposition of we give warnings, therefore everybody can get out in time, with we are prioritising damage over accuracy. I do apologise. Mark's phone line has gone down. Steve's in Andover. Steve, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi there. Thank you for taking my call. In answer to your question, I am not an expert. I'm
not sure anybody is. I'm not sure. On the history of it, obviously, people are going to know a hell of a lot more than we do. But there's no expert analysis of what is happening and what will happen next, I don't think.
No, absolutely. I'm 60. I like to follow current affairs to a certain extent. I think that to answer the question around why has Hamas done what it's done, I think the comment you made with regards to the expected response from Israel, nobody would disagree with. They're doing exactly what we'd expect them to do, what they've done historically, and I think Hamas know that.
So there'll be a debate about whether it is justifiable or not. That is where the world is, really.
So that debate needs to take place. Indiscriminate bombing of somewhere, is that less abhorrent than going in and using machetes and guns rather than missiles? Probably not. The result is going to be the same.
To others it is. I mean, it's mad that, isn't it? It's so when I saw these reports that haven't been confirmed and I think currently look likely to be untrue about babies being beheaded, your reaction to that is more visceral than your reaction to a bombing. But morally, perhaps it shouldn't be. I don't know. I don't think so. I think we hide behind missiles because they are fired from afar. You don't see the graphic an absolute. Someone can stand back and say, "Well, I didn't mean to." Well, even the language is different. A bomb fell on a building and 80 people were killed. 40 babies got beheaded. You're going to have if you were wired up to some sort of emotional reaction metric, you'd have very different results, wouldn't you? On those
absolutely. But I think Hamas are deliberately wanting this reaction, which is going to come, so as to provoke those in the world that are anti-Israeli, anti-Jew, to provoke a wider, not Islamic, but jihad, a religious war. You know, you've got powerful nations like Iran that are supporting the likes of Hezbollah. You've got the conflict in the world with Russia, and you've got people on different stages. And if the abhorrence is enough to provoke two sides of a conflict, of a situation, then that's going to provoke a wider conflict.
So then if historians of the future sit down, let's imagine that there is a wider conflagration, a wider conflict, and please God there isn't. But if historians of the future sat down and tried to separate the sources of that escalation, how would they separate the provocation from the reaction? How would the response to Hamas's atrocities be separated from Hamas's atrocities by historians of the future trying to unpick the escalation?
I think that the only way that Israel can respond and not attract the attention, or they would have the attention, but not attract the reactions from the likes of Iran, is to demonstrate to the world that their intelligence, their skill, their ability to be particular, to be surgical, absolutely targeted, surgical.
But then you bring me back to we are prioritising damage over accuracy, and a quote from a surgeon, a 52-year-old surgeon in Gaza yesterday: "A building nearby received a warning, but it was our block that got hit."
Yeah, it's abhorrent. That's not good enough. They can do better than that. They have the technology to do far better than that. But then you're
demanding that Israel holds itself to a higher account than its enemies, which is, I think, reasonable. But it's not our blood that's been spilt, is it? I'm going to go back briefly to Mark in Crouch End, who got cut off. I think, Mark, we were in the process of dancing around the conclusion that this whole conversation forever will boil down to a question of justification, really, won't it?
I think it's with the justification for in-house. So what do you mean?
Well, I've been a bit distracted by the conversation I've had since you got cut off, but I think we were in the process of talking about you were describing Israel's response as emotional, and I was saying, well, you can hardly question that or blame them for that. So let's take it from there.
Okay, so with the emotional response, where I was trying to allude to is that there is obviously this conflict is being televised, and then there is at the moment, currently, there is a huge, there is wide support for Israel, making retaliatory measures. But I think it needs to be, whatever Israel does, it needs to be quite proportionate, because it doesn't need what Hamas did.
What would proportionate look like?
Proportionate would look like
what's a proportionate response to murdering babies?
Okay, so rather than saying that, it's not actually okay. Rather than going for Hamas, it's going through the people who are funding Hamas. It's going through that whole network of states and people that are actually providing the money, providing the arms, providing the training, because all you're just going after the messengers. You're not actually going for the actual.
It's interesting.
For the actual.
It was ever thus, wasn't it? I mean, all military conflicts have an element of that involved. And a text, as you were speaking, suggested my answer to your question, James. The leaders of Hamas are not even in Gaza. They don't care about their own people, and they are encouraged by Iran. Even the phrase "their own people" is problematic in this context. A lot of reports or a lot of testimony that I've read casts the average Gazan civilian as being diametrically opposed, if not terrorized by Hamas. But these are nuances that often don't have much room in conversations like this. 10:31 is the time. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:35 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I can answer some questions, I think, when they're asked in close to good faith, but I am far from being able to answer all of them. Why do they keep voting for Hamas then is a response to my suggestion that many people living in Gaza are at least opposed to and at most terrorized by Hamas. Well, that's just not true, mate. The last elections, I think, were in 2006, which Hamas won, but it was a very different world. And of course, you can hate the government in this country, despite the fact that they were elected by some of your fellow citizens. So the idea that everyone in Gaza should be held to an electoral result that's 17 years old. I mean, I'm not going to say it's silly because, as I say, I presume your question came from good faith. This text takes up the same point. It's from Azad in Hayes. Not everyone living in Palestine is a terrorist. Just like the rest of the world, they hate Hamas as well. But these innocent people are being killed. People think everyone in Palestine is a terrorist. It's like saying everyone in Northern Ireland belonged to the IRA. I think it is a bit like saying that. Or, well, it's like saying every Catholic in Northern Ireland belonged to the IRA, or every Catholic became a legitimate target for atrocities committed by the IRA, which no one ever said, really. Even in the worst days of the Trouble, hardly anyone ever said, even in the worst days of the Trouble. 10:37 is the time, but it's almost like some sort of diabolical tennis match when you turn from one screen and there is footage of the new Israeli strikes in Gaza, and you turn to another and there's footage from the kibbutz where the corpses of babies have been found. And, you know, I can't make sense of it. I don't even try on days like this to make sense of it. I just try to talk about it in, I hope an intelligent way. I'm not sure we can bring much else to the picture. Daniela is in Maida Vale. Daniela, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning. First of all, I wanted to thank you for your platform to allow people to speak, and you have been an incredible marshal. It's a very hard. You're very kind, but I can't allow compliments when I gave the person insulting me such short shrift to Daniela. So let's move straight on to the reasons for reunion. It does give me some, strength to hear that someone has sense. I hear so many people without sense. What are you talking about when you say proportionate? Do we say to the Ukrainians, you need to be proportionate to the Russians? Of course not. It's the highest form of barbarism. How can one be proportionate with that? You just need to make sure it ends, and it ends quickly.
But we do, actually. I mean, the Ukrainians, for example, aren't allowed to attack Russian territory because that would involve a triggering of NATO or Geneva Convention clauses. So there is. Proportionate is an unhelpful word, but there's an awful lot of things. Sure. Ukraine can't go and attack Russian cities or towns.
I just have to say, a lot of people are in pain.
Well, that's
and
for
it
sure.
It is a war, and war is never pretty. Unfortunately, there are also many people who make lots of money of this war,
this is also
and
true.
The media plays into your emotion, regardless of what your side is on. The biggest test we all have at this current moment is, do you choose for good or do you choose for evil? Everyone at this very moment is tested in their moral compass to see what's happening around you, and not to judge other people, but to give your support and truly care about people. Give your prayers.
Which people?
It doesn't matter. Every person who's suffering. Hamas is a terrorist organization. In 2005, Israel has given back the land. They have ruled the land themselves. They've chosen Hamas. Never has been another election. It's not a democratic system. It is a terror organization, just like the Al-Shabaab, just like Hezbollah. These are not people who want to rule in peace. These are people who try to push.
But how many people? How many? This is why I'm slightly troubled, and I think you misunderstood my questioning of the word proportionate. How many people who have absolutely nothing to do with Hamas would it be
It doesn't matter.
acceptable to kill.
It doesn't matter if you have something to do with it or not. You also had the choice since 2007 to leave that country or to overhaul them. You can also say, I had enough of Hamas.
Well, in that case, I'm going to go back to your earlier compliment and say I think you've completely misconstrued my position. You're endorsing the killing of civilians for the offence of not having left a blockaded territory.
I do never endorse.
Well, what did you mean then when you said you had the chance to leave?
You have the chance to leave.
And if they haven't left,
let me phrase the question differently towards you.
I'd rather hear an answer.
Okay, this is an answer. I can answer with a question. If you live under a terroristic regime, is it a choice to stay or to go? Is it a choice to keep them or not?
But they can't go.
Why not? There are plenty of Palestinians who live over here. There are plenty of Palestinians who live somewhere else.
You know that getting out of Gaza is almost impossible.
Well, now it is, yes.
No, even before this weekend. And I think the Rafah crossing's been bombed now, hasn't it?
Right.
Anyway,
but you had,
so if you want to get out before the bombs drop, I don't quite listen. I don't want to have
that ground.
No, of course I don't. But it's described as the largest open prison in the world by the United Nations. Where could they go?
Right. Where do they go? Can you not make something great out of Gaza? Can you not eliminate and to take responsibility and say, we had enough of this terror. I do not want you to terror. You know that the son of a Hamas leader said it in the UN.
But Daniela, I don't know whether you intend to, but you sound very like somebody who is saying, if you're still there, it's your fault that you die.
No.
Well, what then? Because that's all I can construe from the words that you've said out loud.
Everyone I speak to,
yes.
It's the blame culture. There is no blame.
But you just did blame them. You've literally spent 5 minutes saying, if you haven't left, if you haven't toppled this regime, then it's on you. That's blame.
I just say I blame people who are silent, just like the people in the World War II.
Well, you've now gone in the space of 10 seconds from criticising blame culture to blaming people for being silent.
Yeah.
So that's blame culture.
Well, silence is a choice too. That's not blame culture.
Well, silence is a consequence of terror.
No.
People are terrorised into silence.
That you blame someone and give them responsibility does not necessarily give you to the other end of blame culture.
I don't know what that means. I'm sorry.
What it means is that it is a difference in proportion.
Yeah.
It means that you can still take responsibility
for the actions of... So if I lived in Gaza, I would have to take responsibility for the actions of Hamas.
No, you should take responsibility for your country. You should take responsibility for your people.
It's not technically a country, is it? That's part of the problem.
Well, that's what they technically could have been doing.
If we go back to 1946, but we're in 2023. Just to clarify...
2005. They made an election.
Just to clarify,
yes.
People who die, civilians who die... What word would you use to describe those deaths? Justifiable or unjustifiable?
It's terrible. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, but unjustified or justified?
No one is justified. Who has the moral ground?
Well, you thought you did, because literally 5 minutes ago you were telling them that they should have left, and if they haven't left or somehow contributed to the overthrow of a brutal terrorist regime, then they bear responsibility for the consequences that follow. But I sense your emotion, and emotion can confuse us all. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to clarify what I think most people would take away from the words that you said. But as I say, I've got no particular desire to thrash out some of these niceties with anybody today, Daniela. So do take care. Simon is in Confolens, which I've almost... Oh, I thought it said South Wales. It's South West France. I shall try again. Confolens. Simon, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Thank you for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, basically, I feel it's all about terror.
Yes.
And clearly Hamas knew what was going to happen.
Yes.
And I don't think they care. They want their voice to be. They want their voice to be heard on the world stage, and God, it's been heard, hasn't it?
And they don't care how many people in Gaza die.
No, absolutely not.
That's the kicker, isn't it?
And sadly, I feel that there are people on the Israeli side who also don't care either.
Who don't care how many people in Gaza die?
No.
Yeah, but there's no one in Israel who doesn't care how many people in Israel die.
Absolutely. But the problem is that can you see how this can possibly end? Because I can't.
No, I can't, and I don't think they can, because it's like...
It's so sad.
Yes.
I have no personal, connection to any of this, but I almost feel in tears.
Yes, same.
It is so. Humanity can be so brutal, and it reminds me of back in the day of the hijackings of various planes back in the day in the last century,
but they hand over notes. But they hand over notes, Simon, with a list of demands. I don't know what the list of demands would be here. It's almost like an incoherent terrorism.
Yeah, but what I mean is that they back in the day could never win. Those planes they hijacked, they could never get their aims, but they did it all the same. They have no consequence to their actions, you know?
Yeah, it is bizarre. And it's not, I mean, obviously there was a suicide element to a lot of the attacks at the weekend, 1,500 at the last count. It's probably gone up by now. Hamas terrorist fighters, militants, dead, and knew that they were going to die. But the real stakes are the civilians back in...
Yeah, as is always the case, the innocents, be it children through, you said it before, it's accident of birth and geography. You happen to be born an Israeli or born a Palestinian as a child. You have no control over that, do you, as a child?
And yet your whole future is in large part mapped out as a consequence of that accident. And to that end, Simon, I just read out a paragraph that Daniel Finkelstein wrote in the Times today that really struck me this morning. He wrote, in May 1945, a lone Russian soldier approaching the Brinlitz Nazi labour camp on a horse. He had come to tell the inmates they were free. Delighted as they were, the soldier was rewarded with hugs. The newly liberated men and women were also bewildered. Where would they go now? And that is a question that underpins this entire conversation, this entire region, this entire 80 years, 8 decades of history. Where would they go now? 40% of the world's Jews live in Israel. So the idea of them leaving, which is Hamas's ultimate goal, is absurd. Now, regardless of what you may think about the history, the justifications, the moral ramifications, it is palpably and logistically, never mind morally, absurd to expect that to happen. So when Hamas did what they did this weekend, what were they wanting to occur? 0345 6060 973. It's 10:47.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:51 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where it is a question that begs an answer, isn't it? Given that nobody can be surprised about what is happening, albeit that much of it is in breach almost certainly of international law, blockading, sieging, and children now being killed in Gaza on a scale that will soon match the casualty count in Israel, the atrocities inflicted by Hamas. What did Hamas expect to happen when it lit this metaphorical blue touch paper at the weekend? They must have expected this to happen. Ergo, the question of why they did it, and if you could absolutely unpick that definitively, you'd be able to work out, and I hesitate to use language like this because it seems so inappropriate or at least inadequate, but whether it has worked or not. Because acts of terror have aims, they have goals, and terrorising a population is part of that, but it's certainly... That wouldn't be it. Israel, if you read about the properties around that area that have safe rooms, they're living in a constant state of terror in many ways. They are a terrorised population. And so in many ways are people in Gaza who live in constant fear of other interventions and actions. So that, it's not that. So what was the plan beyond the response? What was the plan beyond the response? 10:53 is the time. David's in Croydon. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I don't think I can go definitive, but I think the short answer is PR. So Hamas need to keep up the narrative that Israel's just as bad as them.
Yes.
So they want to tell the world that Israel wants to get rid of all of Palestinians. And so when Israel hasn't done anything, hasn't retaliated for a while, they have to do something big so that they provoke a reaction, and then they can use that as evidence to say, well, look, Israel are bombing civilians, they're trying to wipe us out and call it genocide. And I think that the Israel gets scrutinised by liberal democracies in the West. So I think they're sort of held to a higher standard, whereas the Hamas...
I think they should be held to a higher standard. A proscribed terrorist organisation versus the government of a sovereign state are two very different things. But the liberal democracies in the West have I mean, if that was the plan, it's kind of backfired in one sense, because people like everyone from Joe Biden down is queuing up to describe the events of the weekend as evil. That's the word that he's used, and talking about being fully supportive of Israel, even as they embark upon a course of action that many observers would describe as being in breach of international law. Again.
But what about the Middle Eastern dictatorships? How are they playing it?
That's what I don't know.
That's who Hamas are appealing to. They don't care if the West support them or not.
So they're appealing to Iran. They're certainly not appealing to Saudi Arabia.
No, they're appealing to Iran and Hezbollah, and they're and obviously
in the hope of what? Not just, it's got to be more than PR. Because, I mean, God, the pity you feel for an ordinary civilian, an ordinary Arab civilian living in Gaza, when their life is of so little consequence to everybody involved in the upper echelons of these conflicts and battles, the people ostensibly on their own, quotes, side, end quotes, and the people categorically not. The lives of these Palestinian civilians are worth nothing, are they, in this context?
No, certainly not to Hamas. Hamas aren't on anyone's side. They've got one aim, which is the complete destruction of Israel. That's what they're trying to do. Whether or not they succeed depends on Iran's reaction.
They can't succeed. 45%, not 40, I got it wrong a minute ago, of the world's Jews now live in Israel. Where else are they going to go? Well,
exactly, but Hamas, they're not.
It is in Hamas's charter. I took a caller earlier in the week who wanted to argue that just because it was in the charter, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. I may have been a bit impatient with him, but it still sounds like a fairly ridiculous position to me.
No, that's their whole.
Yes,
that's what they're for. That's their whole aim. Everything they do, whether it works or whether it's misguided or not, everything they do is to that end, the destruction of Israel.
So it is simply a question of perpetuating the eternal conflict, if that's not tautologous, and there hadn't been a flare-up, a conflagration for some time. So Hamas both effected one and invited one.
Yeah, it's very hard to convince people that Israel's intent on committing a genocide when they've just stayed out of Gaza for however long.
And this is why the argument that, you know, searches and checkpoints and borders and blockades they're just not going to provide enough evidence of a putative genocide for the purposes of Hamas's propaganda.
No,
albeit you wouldn't want to live like that, and I wouldn't want to live like that. It's not evidence of wanting to exterminate us.
God, no, but I mean, we're very lucky that we're in a place where if the leaders were doing stuff like that to us, we'd like to think that we could get rid of them. But the Palestinians can't get rid of Hamas.
But they can be told by some people that they're going to die because they failed to get rid of Hamas, and that's their fault. So
yeah, but the people that say that are not. I mean, they're not intelligent people, are they?
You can say, but they're real, and their vote was worth the same as ours. Their voice is as loud as yours, and I think we came pretty close to hearing someone say that on the programme today. And you know, it's a position that you can comprehend, if not ever condone or endorse. But and the more vicious, the more horrible, the more unthinkable. Those are the three words we started with, aren't they? Unthinkable, and unjustifiable. The more unthinkable, the more unjustifiable these atrocities were, then oddly the easier it becomes to comprehend people who perhaps pause their own morality, pause their own moral compass while watching the response. David, thank you. Connor is in Norwich. Connor, what would you like to say?
Oh, how's it going? I think this whole thing is, well, it's a mess, obviously, as we can all see. And I think one of the biggest things we've all sort of neglected to ask ourselves is, like, you know, not just the question of, like, you know, what is Hamas's goal, but more like the same question that we've unfortunately been asking ourselves for years, which is what is the resolution to any of this? And it becomes a difficult conversation when you sort of talk about, like, you know, show me a map of Israel in 1930 on the globe.
Mm.
You know, it didn't exist. Unfortunately, you know, the Jewish people were terribly persecuted by the Germans. We got involved, we stopped that, and then at the end of the war, from what I can tell from research, we sort of had a conversation, what can we do to help you? And they went, well, this bit of land here is ours. We were told by God it's ours. And we went, okay, we'll move the people who already lived there.
Not quite. It was the United Nations in 1947, having visited Jewish refugee camps in Europe and toured Palestine, that proposed a division of land between Jews and Palestinian Arabs, with each having a state. The Jews accepted that, and the Arab states launched a war. And that is the partition that Palestinians are still fighting.
But that is part of the problem. What would you do if suddenly we had someone turn up in our country today and go, by the way, we've decided that this is where they go? And I think this is the problem. I mean, you know, we have issues.
Well, honestly, that's quite easy to answer, isn't it? In the context of concentration camps and Holocaust.
In the context of me and you, yes, it is, because we're.
Well, then don't ask me then if you don't want to listen to my answer.
No, but the issue is that we're not looking at reasonable, rational people that live by Western morals.
Whoa, okay. Who are you talking about now?
Well, we're talking about any side involved in this. Like,
right.
the Israelis have their religion, and anytime religion gets brought up, it becomes a complicated situation. As someone that doesn't believe in a God, I think the whole thing's rather silly.
Person to mention religion today. You can't really comment on the silliness of religion when the word Holocaust was used in the previous sentence.
Well, no, that's not what I'm getting at here, James. You know,
I don't know what you're getting at, Connor.
Of anyone for religion is an abhorrent thing, you know. But I think we come down to the complicated matter of how do we make two opposing ideologies match, and that's what I'm trying to say.
You don't have to. You have a two-state solution, which was put on the table in 1947 and rejected. So, yeah, listen, I do understand the point that you're making. I'm more comfortable with it when we're in a period of non-conflict than conflict, but the historical grievance of being told that this land that you currently inhabit is to be handed over to another section of global society, a decision taken by United Nations. I mean, that's the point you're making, and you make it quite well, but history is peppered with examples of similar. I mean, the whole notion of empire or colonization or whatever you want to call it is about powerful entities having dominion over land, over territory. Go back to William the Conqueror if you want, and the rejection of that is 80 years old now and persists. So another good point to make, another important point to make, and I refer again to Daniel Finkelstein's column in the Times today, is when you talk about being pro-Palestine or wanting a free Palestine or waving a Palestinian flag, all of which, by the way, I think you should be free to do, unlike the Home Secretary, according to some reports this morning, you need to know what you mean. Do you mean a state alongside Israel within safe borders, as in a sort of Gaza without the fences, in which case there's a lot to talk about. But if you mean a Palestinian state in place of Israel, then it's just not on, ever. Morally, historically, geographically and logistically. Thank you, Connor. It's 11:02.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 5 minutes after 11 and we will move on now, albeit that there is an enormous appetite to continue the conversation. I think today we've kind of reached a point of circularity where we would just go back over. It's my fault probably for not coming up with more questions, but as I'm sure you can appreciate, it's not like normal quotes, topics, end quotes, is it, when people are dying as you speak and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. A closing word, if I may, and I'm grateful to John Podmore who tweeted this. Tweeted one word, actually, recruitment, which just set me off thinking. And that is going to be a large part of the answer to the question we asked, isn't it? It's an enormous recruitment drive by Hamas, who are not uniformly popular in Gaza anymore. Very slightly different dynamic than in the rest of the world, but they are not. And yet the actions that are unfolding now, see one headline on Sky News, the Israel-Hamas war, which perhaps explains why the BBC and some others are reluctant to use the word terrorist in the context of Hamas, because if it's a war, then you're bringing value judgments in that speak of partiality, although I'm happy to use that word. I may change my mind at a later date, although frankly I doubt it. But what happens now in Gaza, that's the next 2 or 3 generations of young Palestinians growing up hating Israel. And you might argue it would have happened anyway, I don't know. But Hamas have certainly made sure of it, haven't they? The fire burning in the bellies of young children who know no different existence, but now have the added dimension of carnage. That could be it. Sometimes we overthink things, you know. It's a huge recruitment drive. But it's a recruitment drive built on an absence of concern for the lives, the actual lives of the people you're trying to recruit, which is where I think those of us on this side of the world, or those of us coming away, trying to step back and observe, that's where we lose any thread, really, any intellectual thread. You just sort of have contempt for the people that you claim to represent. It's bizarre. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. We move on completely now into entirely new territory. It was almost as if, during his speech yesterday, that Sir Keir Starmer decided to give us a bit of a topic for the programme, because he went into territory that is among the most interesting that we explore together, and certainly among the territory that I enjoy exploring the most. And I thought he put it pretty well, actually, and it actually constituted a bit of a penny drop moment for me. It gave me a slightly better understanding, perhaps, of some of the things that have really got on my nerves about Keir Starmer in the last few years. Just have a listen to this.
Let me put it this way. At some point in your life, many people here will have heard a nagging voice inside saying, no, this isn't for you. You don't belong here. You can't do that. Working class people certainly hear that voice. Trust me. In some ways, it's the hardest class ceiling of all. But conference. Imagine if, instead, a whole country said, you do belong. Imagine if a whole country said, we back your potential. Imagine if a whole country commits properly to unlocking the pride you have in your community. Then look what we could build. A country where every contribution is equally respected. Where you don't have to change who you are just to get on. Where whatever your background, you feel secure, valued, certain that things will be better for your children.
Wow. So I think we should probably take our medicine first, shouldn't we? The amount of time we've spent together trying to pin down what working class means and all the usual well-intentioned nonsense, much of it coming from me about knowing which knife and fork to use, or whether you say working class or working class, whether your parents went to university, whether you went to university, whether in fact it's just a socio-economic status issue, which is usually what it boils down to. I now know exactly, I think, what Keir Starmer meant, and I can't quite believe the clarity that he has provided. He is using working class in this context as the opposite of entitlement. That's it. That's all it is. So the right wing use it as a synonym for racist now. They talk about the elites are ignoring working class concerns and immigration is out of control, sort of just neatly glossing over things like Cable Street or the very simple notion of solidarity. The left have used it in very nebulous terms, I think. What is the working class? But he's pinning it down to a place that I haven't really seen it through before. I think, and I'll play you that again, because for Keir Starmer, that was pretty rousing, wasn't it? And the way the crescendo of applause built up in the room, it was old-fashioned oratory, and he is not an orator. I have an exchange with my mate Johnny Vaughan, and I have brilliant conversations about politics. Johnny's a genius. If you're not familiar with his deep thinking, then do listen to his appearance on my Full Disclosure podcast. But he sends me these texts, and I look at them, and I think, what's he on about now? And then I think, crikey, yeah, he's right. He's really intrigued at the moment by the importance of oratorical quality, not by what is being said, but by the importance to voters of how it is being said. My position is a little bit fence sitting. It's kind of, well, of course it shouldn't matter, but it does, and that's the bottom line. But there, Starmer came the closest he's come, I think, in all the years that we've been watching him to setting a room alight. And interesting that he went in on class. Now, he would be particularly conscious of this, it occurred to me yesterday, listening to it, because the school he went to became fee-paying while he was there, I think, although the children, the boys that were already there, were not required to pay fees. Is that right? Did it become fee-paying while he was already there, or did it become a grammar school while he was already there? I forget the details, but that's such an imposition of hierarchy in a space where it hadn't previously existed that I suspect that was pretty formative. And then he tells a remarkable story about his parents turning up at Buckingham Palace, presumably for his knighthood or for some ennoblement that he was about to receive. And they turned up with their Great Danes in the car. And obviously there's not any infrastructure in place at Buckingham Palace for people turning up in an old estate car with I think 2 Great Dane dogs in the back. His mum, his late mother, was a huge animal carer. I don't know what the word is. She even had a donkey sanctuary in a field behind the house. And as she became more disabled as she got older, one of her great pleasures, he told me, was to sit in the window just looking at the donkeys. But he tells that story with perhaps a degree of deprecation, because there's embarrassment. So he loved it and he was proud, but there's embarrassment attached. You know, if you're at a party and your parents are the only ones there that haven't put on the right clothes, as a child you feel a cringe, right? You feel a sense of cringe, I imagine. It's never quite happened to me, but certainly having quite broad Yorkshire accents was rare at my posh school. So I think he's talking about entitlement, isn't he? There's no real mystery of what he means when he says that, or when we say it. So if you have a sense of entitlement, you often don't know what it is. There's that wonderful line about privilege, which I think is the bedfellow of entitlement, isn't it? And if you've spent your whole life enjoying privilege, then equality feels like oppression. And that, I think, explains the editorial policies of the Daily Telegraph and much of the rest of the media. It's why their obsession with diversity or Black Lives Matter or whatever it may be. They're being told that you have to be we have to work a little bit harder to make things fairer. And if you benefit enormously from the unfairness, and you've never actually acknowledged that, because, to be fair, you've never actually realised it. You were born 3-0 up and you think you scored a hat-trick. Someone comes along and says, we're going to give them a couple of goals as well. You'll still be 3-2 ahead, but you think that's grossly unfair. Why are they getting given 2 goals when I'm not being given any? That's absolutely outrageous. That's positive discrimination, that is. That's social engineering. It's disgusting. It's woke blobness gone mad. But entitlement is fascinating. And I can't believe we've been having conversations about class for 20 years. And it's taken Keir Starmer, of all people, to drive home that it's often about a state of mind rather than a state of being. So I'm not beating myself up completely, because we've talked a hell of a lot about cap doffing and deference, but I've always done it from a place perhaps of arrogance. And I marvel at how decent people can think that Jacob Rees-Mogg gives a flying fig about their interests or their children's future. And I talk about deference, doff cap, tug forelock, vote Rees-Mogg. That's working class. That sentiment that these people are your betters. That's what he's talking about. And if you've got entitlement, you've got no idea. Sarah, in a text, describes it as the ignorance of entitlement. And it's something that you're very lucky to break out of. To realise that you were born 1-0 up or 2-0 up or 3-0 up. Shouldn't be hard, should it? Because you could just point at someone over there who was born 20-0 up and realise that there's people over there born 4-0 down. And it is the job of politics to level that playing field, says Keir Starmer. I love this. Listen again to actually, no, I'll come back and do it in a minute. I'm already a bit late. But what I'm going to do is ask you about the moments where you have felt or you have heard that voice in the back of your head. Because I thought, there's nothing more funny, is there, than a public school educated middle class journalist claiming that he has working class roots. So I shall spare you that. I don't. Also, it upsets my mum. I categorically don't, albeit that 4 generations ago perhaps I might have done. I can hear my mum in my voice now saying, your great-granddad played the flute for Queen Victoria, but I don't know whether that's supposed to prove that we were middle class or just whether my great-granddad was a brilliant flautist. I got another one who played cricket for Yorkshire. But the point, of course, is that voice. You think you've got that voice in the back of your head telling you that, but he's talking about something quite specific and particular. And I want to try and hear that voice. I want to know what that voice is that makes somebody working class. Even if they've got £10 million in the bank. I think this is fascinating, and I can't wait to hear what you think.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11. Have a listen to this from Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, and then tell me when you heard that voice. And I'll tell you why I don't think I ever have, even though I've often found myself in situations where I felt profoundly uncomfortable, to the point when I was a rubbish young gossip columnist of puking up through nerves born of a fear of having to march up to famous people and start a conversation. But I think that's a very different thing. Have another listen to this.
Let me put it this way. At some point in your life, many people here will have heard a nagging voice inside saying, no, this isn't for you. You don't belong here. You can't do that. Working class people certainly hear that voice. Trust me. In some ways, it's the hardest class ceiling of all. But conference. Imagine if instead a whole country said, you do belong. Imagine if a whole country said, we back your potential. Imagine if a whole country commits properly to unlocking the pride you have in your community. Then look what we could build. A country where every contribution is equally respected. Where you don't have to change who you are just to get on. Where whatever your background, you feel secure, valued, certain that things will be better for your children.
Actually, there's two, isn't there? There's two definitions there. The one is the voice in the back of your head telling you don't belong, you're not good enough. And the other is the knowledge that you have to change yourself to get on. Do you know, probably this job, anyone doing this job is probably the worst person in the world to ask this question from a point of scepticism. Imagine the sense of entitlement you need to think that you have the right to make a living sitting in front of a microphone, sharing your thoughts with hundreds of thousands of people. I've never actually clocked that before, but when I did my first shift here at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night in the new LBC, I came in to do holiday cover and swing before that when we were under previous owners. I was nervous, like an actor might be nervous before going on stage, but I had absolutely no qualms about my right to be here. I'm going to get quite emotional this hour because I just heard my dad's voice in the back of my head about him telling me and mum telling me after he died that one of the reasons he sent me to the school that he sent me to is because I have every right to be in places that he didn't get into. I have as much right to do things and to be things that would previously have been confined to more privileged families and more privileged people. But imagine the level of entitlement you need to do this. If I hadn't had my education, my background, imagine, just think, I don't want to break my career live on the radio by having some sort of kind of crisis. But how arrogant do you have to be to do this for a living? So in many ways, asking what it's like to have a little voice in your head telling you that you can't do something, there is no job in the world that is better evidence of not having that voice, or possibly not even understanding what that voice might sound like, than this job. It's incredible. He's not saying it's only working class people. I think imposter syndrome is endemic among anyone with a conscience or a functioning intellect. But you know, perhaps looking back, that the reason why you heard that voice telling you this isn't for you, you don't belong here, you can't do that. You heard your grand's voice saying this isn't for the likes of us. Was because of your class, because of your background, because of the environment in which you grew. So tell me what that voice said to you and when. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And that line about having to change who you are to get ahead, what did that mean to you? How have you changed who you are to get ahead? 0345 6060 973. So 2 lines here. And I hope you're up for this, because I'd like to talk about it for a decent length of time. Question number 1, what did that voice say to you? And when? Crucially, when? What was the context? Because when I was doing my first gigs as a gossip columnist, and I've told you before about the lift doors open at the National Theatre and everybody in front of me is famous and my job is to march up to them and ask them questions, and I was so scared the lift doors closed again and I went back downstairs. That's not me not belonging here. That's just me being really nervous and me finding the prospect of marching up to people and interrupting them and trying to engage them in conversation quite difficult. But compared to stepping into a studio, sitting down in front of a microphone and thinking that I have a right to share my thoughts on anything from the Middle Eastern conflict to the future of British steel. Good God! No voice in the back of my head saying, James, sit down, mate. Never. It's bizarre, isn't it? Let's crack straight on. 25 minutes after 11. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. David is in Almera in Spain. David, what would you like to say?
Well, Almeria, if you like.
Almeria. How about that show? You see, that is in another context, mispronouncing a word would be one of those moments where the voice in the back of your head starts attacking you. But carry on.
Okay. Well, James, I was born into poverty. I consider myself to be working class because I never knew anything better. But there was a voice in the back of my head that told me that if I wanted to be listened to, I had to learn to speak properly. And I had the benefit of a public library that taught me grammar and a BBC that taught me how to speak. And the BBC was brilliant in those days. The home service was fantastic. And
so you had to, this is his words, Keir Starmer's words, you had to change yourself to get ahead.
Absolutely, I did, yeah. I just had to change also my environment because there was no voice in the back of my head telling me I couldn't get on. There was a whole society.
No. It was a voice. It was just that you've called that voice society. It's both, isn't it? It's not one or the other.
Well, okay, well, it was inaudible. Let's put it that way. It was embedded in my brain. The thing is, he is right, absolutely right. And I did change myself, of course. I did become something other than I was born into. And the strange part about it, James, is that whenever I spoke to people at work, various jobs I did, everyone assumed I'd had a public school background because of the way I spoke. And that actually levered my way through life.
Well, I was going to ask, did it work?
It did. Absolutely, it did. I left school with no qualifications whatsoever. And at the end of I started out in engineering. And at the end of my career, I was a senior conceptual design engineer. And
if you spoke with a broad regional accent, do you honestly think that you would have hit glass ceilings?
I think it would have been much more difficult.
Yeah, I think you're right. You've taken me up to I want to squeeze in one more before the news, just to get it. But I hear you. You could have this. So that's what it is. Even perhaps the horrible experience of knowing that you're good enough, but watching people who walk the walk and talk the talk, or public school swagger. It can't just be that, because not everyone who is middle class went to public school. But it is that sense of secret society, secret clubs. Marie's in Brixton. Marie, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi. So, I grew up in, South London, and I'm a black woman. And I started off, quite low, working in a checkout, supermarket. Yeah. And I worked my way up to be an analyst, a business analyst. So I'm currently looking for work. And I've just done what Keir was saying about I'm doubting myself, and I don't know why I'm doubting myself, because I worked hard to get where I am.
Yes. And you've proved yourself time and time again, but there's a voice in your head saying, you don't belong here, you can't do that.
Belong. And I've got an interview coming up today, and you do your due diligence. You look at the company, and it's basically all white men in the top roles, all managers, directors, CEOs. And my first thought was, I don't see anything that looks like me. I don't think I'm going to belong here, or they may not employ me. And I thought, well, why not? I haven't even tried. Because that's self-doubt. Because of the self-doubt.
I think the relationship between class and race is one of the deepest and most important in society, isn't it?
I don't know. Why am I doubting myself?
Well, you tell me. You tell me why. Why are you doubting yourself?
maybe because I don't think I'm good enough.
Were you rubbish at your last job?
No.
Were you rubbish at the job before that?
No.
Have you spent your entire career surrounded by colleagues who think you're rubbish?
No, exactly.
How often do you knock it out of the park?
All the time.
So what the hell are you talking about?
Exactly. So why do I have that thing in my head telling me, apply for that one? Apply for that one. No,
I don't want to sabotage your job interview, but there is a little bit of me that's thinking another approach to this. If you'd sort of assembled yourself in a slightly different way, is why the hell am I being interviewed for a job where there's nobody like me already in senior positions? You must be so embarrassed and ashamed. I don't think you should necessarily do this at the actual job interview.
No.
But why aren't they embarrassed and ashamed that they all look the same?
Yeah, there is that too. But it is a question of the self-doubt, and I think it is the do I belong?
And that is linked, in your case, to class and race, but indubitably to class as well, because you mentioned South London, you mentioned, the circumstances growing up, starting on a supermarket till. These should be superpowers, Marie, shouldn't they? Not sources of insecurity.
Yes, it is insecurity based on that.
All right, here's two business analysts, right? Yeah. One of them started work as a supermarket cashier. One of them started work as a graduate trainee business analyst. Same age, same time. Which one has gone further? The one who started as a supermarket cashier or the one who started as a graduate trainee business analyst?
Oh, definitely the supermarket girl.
There it is then. That's the end of this conversation. Good luck, crikey, good luck today as well. You deserve it as well. I think that's an important thing to remember. But if you're having any wobbles on your way in, just imagine that fictional business analyst who started off as a graduate trainee when you were scanning beans in Sainsbury's or wherever it was, and ask yourself who's fought harder and proved themselves more often in the context of the job that you are both chasing. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
25 minutes after 12. If you doubt the accuracy of my suggestion that one of the key signifiers of entitlement is not knowing that you have got a sense of entitlement, I can recommend an article in the Daily Telegraph today, which has just been brought to my attention by the Conservative Party chairman, Greg Hands. It appears under the headline, Labour's tax rate could force us to sell our house just to keep my son at school. And it's a catalogue of parents of children who are currently being privately educated at quite expensive fee-paying schools, complaining about potentially having to pay a bit more to keep them there if VAT is introduced. And it's the same people, or rather it's the same milieu, where people who can't feed their children or can't afford to pay their heating bills are told that they need to work harder or budget better or take dietary advice from 30p Leanock. It's the same. So that level of entitlement, I've got to be honest with you, I'm not sure I enjoy anything more than hearing people who are very, very quick to deny the existence of poverty in the context of food banks or even hygiene poverty, people who can't afford to buy basic products, which are, any food bank worker will tell you, any food bank volunteer will tell you, great weight is placed upon things like shampoo and soap and detergent and washing powder, because these are big ticket items potentially in some cases, and in others you just haven't got that last quid. That same people who indulge in that sort of poverty porn are the people who have to get their handkerchiefs out and just private school parents may it's some kids over there going hungry. Yeah, it's the parents' fault. I've probably got a flat screen TV. Some parents over here might have to send their children to a normal school. Oh my God, it's just terrible. I can't. So it's hilarious, but also kind of important, isn't it? With the it's 25 minutes after 11, not 12. My apologies to the gentleman that just soiled his own underpants. Oh, it's not a gentleman. It's Kate in Cornwall. Yeah, because of the language you use, Kate. 25 minutes after 12, James, because of the language you used, very lazy snobbery on my part, or a kind of low-level misogyny. I presumed you were a bloke. Why on earth shouldn't women use language like that? It's disgusting behaviour on my part, and another example of a curious sense of entitlement. But I digress. Keir Starmer has talked very persuasively of a voice in the background, a voice in your own head telling you, you don't belong here, you can't do that, this isn't for you. And it's, in a sense, one of the things he uses to define working class. Or, as I have extrapolated from that, the absence of a sense of entitlement. You're not born with a sense of entitlement. our parents pay fortunes to imbue us with one in some cases, and others you just, you know that it is your milieu. If your dad was an accountant, then you can be an accountant. So what is it? When did you hear that voice? Craig's on the Wirral. Craig, what would you like to say?
Okay, well, I like to see myself as working class, and it's something I've felt sort of all my life, and I just think the difference between working class and middle class is sort of like aspirations. There's, even at a very young age,
yes,
you sort of sense that there's certain jobs which you could never go into because, you know, the middle classes, they look down upon you. They, you know, the words they use. It's just like snobbery as well, isn't it?
Yes, reverse snobbery, because they may not be looking down on you. They will in some cases, but in others it might be your imagination.
Well, I just think because obviously they use completely different words. They're always picking up on social cues.
But that's social cues and words are different. I'm not comfortable. And listen, this might be my inbuilt prejudices. I'm not comfortable equating education with class, Craig. Reading a lot is why people have big vocabularies, and the idea that that's a mark of class is quite a new thing, I think.
Well, I think class is also without the sort of I think the middle class they have to feel as though they're superior to you, because otherwise they wouldn't exist. Would they? You know, there has to be this.
But you've spent. I mean, I'm feeling a bit unkind now because you opened the call by telling me that you felt inferior to them.
No, I wouldn't say inferior. I felt, different. I feel that they because you got a regional accent. They're always sort of like looking down because you don't sound like them, and even going through like they always correcting you, thinking that they're better than you. And if you want to go into things which are predominantly middle class areas, that you just half the time you just wouldn't even turn up to the interview. You just wouldn't have those same.
Well, that's exactly it. But so this is really interesting because I hadn't thought about the. So if you're in the middle of this story, you're getting pressure from within, which is the voice saying, this isn't for you, you don't belong here, you can't do that. But what Keir Starmer possibly missed is the pressure from without, which is why the caller in Almeria mentioned society telling him you can't do this. So it's not just one or the other, is it? You might have an internal voice telling you that this isn't for the likes of you, but there are plenty of external voices doing it as well, sometimes in your own family.
But it's also the teachers as well. I mean, you get it from teachers as well, because we notice, like in school, even like young school, when you're little, the teachers seem to spend all of the effort and time on the clever kids who are getting it, and then there's poor little Timmy at the back who's eating his pens, who's not getting any of it. And they don't spend any time with him. They just spend all the time on the people who are already doing great. Like the 11 plus. I mean, the 11 plus, right? I didn't even do it. This is a true story. On the 11 plus, I just wrote my name on that paper and didn't even do it because I thought, the grammar school was just not a place where people like me go, and that was at age 11.
But what if your mum and dad or a parent had been telling you that it was your right to go there?
But then, the thing with parents is that I was brought up by my sort of grandparents.
Okay.
But then, those are obviously, they can be like working class people anyway, and they're conditioned to thinking these are the jobs that we do.
But this is who he's addressing, isn't it? He wants to break that cycle of repetition and say that there isn't. Do you think it's feasible, Craig?
No, I don't think it's feasible at all, because I just think there will always be those prejudices from the people who sort of run.
We need to protect what we've got.
Yeah, because I didn't go to school with anyone who wanted to be a pilot. I mean, I reckon I could fly a plane, but
I thought you said pirate then. No, it wasn't your accent. It's my earphones.
Right. Yeah, well, it's just things like, the people I went to school with didn't aspire to be a pilot or an architect or, just things like that. You're just thinking you'd either be a gas man like me or an electrician, you work in a factory, you do all those, kind of things.
Yeah.
And then obviously being northern as well, I think you got,
plays a part.
I think you sort of, prejudice against them. So if you're sort of white, northern, and male. I think you're the most marginalised demographic in the country as well, I think.
Well, try being black northern and male, surely, or black northern and female.
I mean, I don't know. Do you know what it seems like to me, right? It seems like humans are hateful by nature, right? And then we tend
that's a horrible thing to say.
It is, but then we seem to support hate like a football team. As long as you're on the hate, there's it's okay to hate it as long as it's okay to hate certain things.
Constantly being given permission or feel as if we're being given permission to hate on people we don't know or don't. So at my school, even if you were in like the lower streams academically, no one would bat an eyelid if you said you wanted to be a doctor when you grow up. But I don't know how we separate the question of class from education, because what you're describing is pretty much what Keir Starmer would describe as a desperate need for schools to be teaching young people, and it's probably very different from how it was in your day, but not as different as he would want it to be, that no doors should be shut to you. It's why the ambition to go to university was part of this speech as well. He couldn't believe that he'd heard Rishi Sunak essentially calling for fewer people to go to university and describing it as a false dream. I think you just burst that balloon really effectively. But you can't, whether it's feasible or not is I suppose that's at the heart of all political questions, isn't it? I believe him. I think it's what he wants, but he didn't go to a school like Craig's. He went to a school that became fee-paying halfway through, Reigate Grammar. And I think that is really interesting, probably more interesting than you do, because I get a little bit obsessive about this kind of stuff. But the idea that halfway through his education, the school's nature changed and all of the boys joining would have been from wealthy backgrounds, and he wasn't. So suddenly, having gone to a selective school where his academic credentials gave him a certain amount, presumably, of credibility and kudos, he was in a school that he wouldn't have been able to go to because his parents wouldn't have been able to afford it. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:49 is the time. It is a question for the ages, and one to which we will return shortly. But first, I want to catch up on a court case unfolding while the attention of the world, quite understandably and necessarily, has been drawn by events in Israel and subsequently Gaza. It's the third and final day of the Supreme Court hearing over the UK's Rwanda migration deal. It's a very important case, as you probably know, but which our guest will explain why shortly. And it comes also on a day that Washington Post has undertaken a fairly comprehensive report into the Rwandan regime's attitude towards dissenters and critics elsewhere in the world. How can I put this? If you read the Washington Post article, which I'll tweet shortly if I haven't already, then Suella Braverman's determination, never mind dream, of deporting people to this place, where, of course, refugees were shot dead just a few years ago for protesting about their food rations, becomes ever more diabolical. But I don't want to preempt the court case, which Lizzie did, and a freelance Home Affairs journalist has been following closely. Lizzie, just remind us of what is at stake here and why, if you would.
Good morning.
Hello.
So this has been a long-running legal battle that really dates right back to when this deal was first announced in 2022. What we've had is 3 stages. This is the final one in the UK. And at first, the deal, which seeks to allow the UK to send asylum seekers who arrive on small boats to Rwanda, at first it was ruled legal by the High Court. But then very quickly that was appealed by lawyers who represent the asylum seekers who've been selected. The Court of Appeal then found that actually it was unlawful, and now the government's appealed that to the Supreme Court.
Why was it unlawful? Why did the appeal court find it unlawful?
Lots of different issues were raised, but the one that effectively won was that the lawyers representing asylum seekers and the UN Refugee Agency argued that if asylum seekers are sent to Rwanda, there is a real risk that they could be, it's called refoulement, which is quite a technical term, but what it basically means is that you are sent out of Rwanda and ultimately end up back in a country where you face serious risk. So it's happened before. There's been cases where Afghan asylum seekers have been ejected from Rwanda and ended up in Afghanistan, for example. And there are cases where the UNHCR has found people who were ejected from Rwanda and being sent back to Eritrea, which is the country they originally fled.
So it's not about the legality or otherwise of the policy per se. It's about the safety of the specific destination in the case of this plan.
Yes, exactly. At the first stage, at the High Court, there was an argument about the legality of the deal on principle, but the High Court found that it was legal on principle because ultimately the question about whether it was legal would always come down to the specifics. So that's what we've ended up with on Rwanda.
And what have the events of the last 3 days boiled down to, in your view?
It's come down to an argument about whether the commitments that the Rwandan government has made as part of this deal and that the money the UK's given it, whether those are enough to stop what's happened in the past happening again. The Home Office's argument is that it's kind of designed a watertight deal with monitoring processes and it's given Rwanda a lot of money and therefore they will keep to their commitments and they will process asylum claims in line with international law and that there won't be any risk of people who are transferred from the UK being chucked out of Rwanda and ending up in danger. But on the other side, they're saying that there is a lot of risk, that there's a lot of evidence that shows that this has been happening to people as recently as last year after the deal was signed, and that the commitments that Rwanda has signed don't actually address those risks because they don't have the capacity to actually do what they say they're going to do. Sorry.
No, you carry on, sorry.
The government's trying to deal with that by saying that it's the government's call whether Rwanda can actually comply with this. The Home Office is arguing that it should be left to the judgment of the Home Secretary. It was Priti Patel when the deal was signed, now it's Suella Braverman, but that it should be left to the judgment of the government whether a friendly nation is going to comply with a deal and a commitment in the future. Mm-hmm. And it's saying that the court should afford what it calls special weight to the government's judgment and I quote, be very slow to differ. So they're saying it's the government's judgment and a future prediction that Rwanda will comply with this and the court shouldn't overrule that. And the other side are naturally arguing that the government doesn't have the power to predict that stuff and it has to look at the evidence, and the evidence is that this is going to go badly wrong.
So the opinion of Suella Braverman, who has publicly spoken of her dream of deporting people in precisely these circumstances, would supersede judicial oversight?
The way the Home Secretary is used in this is a kind of de facto kind of figure for the government itself rather than anyone personally. Okay. But yes, they're arguing that the government itself has the specialist experience to make these kind of judgment calls and that the courts don't. I think the wording today on the final day was that it's the government that's best placed to make those kind of decisions.
Good grief. And too late, presumably, because a crucial part of that is the assurances from the Rwandan regime that they will abide by whatever requirements are made of them by not so much international law, international law and the UK government. So too late, presumably, for this. I don't even know if you've seen it, Lizzie. This 115-page report published today by Human Rights Watch in New York, looking at a wide array of Rwandan authorities and their proxies using violence, judicial mechanisms, intimidation to try to silence criticism from Rwandans living around the world. So this, if I understand it, the government's case would completely ignore any questions about the reliability or otherwise of the Rwandan regime.
The government's kind of touched it, but kind of not gone too specific. They keep on describing Rwanda as a friendly state. They say they were the ones involved in negotiations, and they say they're going to apply. But the other side haven't minced their words. Right. Yesterday, the barrister representing a group of asylum seekers who've been selected for the deal called Rwanda an authoritarian one-party state that doesn't tolerate criticism. Yep. It's a regime which imprisons, tortures and murders those it considers to be its opponents. And they did talk about attempted assassinations in other countries and crackdowns within Rwanda. And they ultimately argued that the country is so oppressive and unsafe that the monitoring that the UK says will happen for the deal can't happen because asylum seekers will be too scared to complain and officials in the country may be too scared to act.
It would be sort of grossly unprofessional of me to ask which way you think it's going to go.
I'm not a betting woman, unfortunately. It's going to be very interesting because whatever the Supreme Court does sets a legal precedent for all other courts. And this question of whether the government's judgment on what will happen in future, regardless of what's happened in the past, the question of whether that judgment can supersede any kind of fact-finding exercise by a court is going to have a really huge impact either way, because this case will be cited in a whole range of other cases, and I think they will be really, really, really careful on which way they come down on that, and for that reason I think it's actually very difficult to call.
Well, thank you for giving us such a detailed account of what has unfolded. When do we get the judgment, Lizzie?
At the earliest next month, but it could take longer.
And, of course, it's of enormous political significance as well. Lizzie Dearden, freelance Home Affairs journalist, who you can, of course, follow on Twitter. And where can people read your report on this, Lizzie? Is it in the Eye? Oh, sorry, Lizzie.
Hi, I'm sorry. Just had a bit of crosstalk there, but I can hear you now.
Where can people read your reports on this?
At the moment, we can look on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, OK, and I'll send some links out to that as well. Many thanks for your time and attention. 11:58 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. In fact, I already have. I've just tweeted or X'd. I'm never going to get used to saying X'd. I've just X'd. A link to her coverage of this case. I mean, it is fascinating, especially when you see it in conjunction with this Human Rights Watch report that has been published in the last couple of days. And speaking of things that have been published in the last couple of days, I thought it was probably worth reading you this, which an awful lot of people have sent to me from Haaretz, which is, I think, the oldest newspaper in Israel. And it's an editorial that puts some of the conversations we've had over the last couple of days in a slightly different light. The disaster that befell Israel on the holiday of Simchat Torah is the clear responsibility of one person, Benjamin Netanyahu. The Prime Minister, who has prided himself on his vast political experience and irreplaceable wisdom in security matters, completely failed to identify the dangers he was consciously leading Israel into when establishing a government of annexation and dispossession, when appointing Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir to key positions, while embracing a foreign policy that openly ignored the existence and rights of Palestinians. So that is from a very prominent and respected Israeli newspaper. And you wouldn't think it, would you, listening to some of the coverage and commentary from the media and indeed from the political establishment in this country. But, the truth is really simple. It's 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The UN is expecting, it's being reported now, a severe shortage of water in Gaza. So, as I said to you, first early doors, 10 o'clock on Monday morning, the horror we are dealing with now is going nowhere. Which is partly why we are moving into slightly different territory for at least... or very different territory for at least some of the time we spend together every day. The territory we're in at the moment is class, and the territory that we will move into shortly, for the first time ever on the programme, actually, in all the years we've spent together, is mathematics, for reasons that are also linked to Keir Starmer's speech, or to, at least to the Labour Party. Well, no, to Keir Starmer's speech. One of the funniest, one of the pithiest comments that I saw was an attempt to describe the difference between... I'm not going to be able to find it now because I do so much flipping tweeting or Xing or whatever you want to call it that it's almost impossible to find stuff unless you can remember enough words to do a search on the keyword. Oh, no, I found it. I thought this was very, very funny from a policy and politics correspondent at the New Statesman called Zoe Grunewald. She said, Starmer is offering a lot for young people here. Houses, climate pledges, technical colleges, compared to Sunak's speech where he just took away their cigarettes and told them they'd have to study their least favourite subject for even longer. That's the only analysis you need, really, from a young person's point of view. But we'll get stuck into maths shortly for reasons that I will explain. Before that, what did the voice say to you? The voice that Keir Starmer spoke about yesterday in his conference speech. The voice that says, no, this isn't for you. You don't belong here. You can't do that. When did you hear that voice loudest? When was that voice at its loudest? And I'm using myself as a guinea pig. You don't have that voice, or even if you have it, you learn to ignore it. Otherwise, there's no earthly way you could even begin to do a job like this one. You don't. No, you don't. So you don't. It's not for the likes of you. When did you hear that voice, and how linked is it to what we call class, or indeed working class? The more working class you are, the louder the voice telling you to know your place, telling you you don't belong here, telling you you can't do that, telling you no, this isn't for you. That's my thesis, built on what Keir Starmer said yesterday. Mickey's in Manchester. Mickey, what would you like to say?
Thanks for having me on, James. Apologies if I stumble with my words. I might be a bit nervous. But the first time I remember hearing that voice inside my head and having those feelings was when I was walking myself to a football match and arriving there, and all my peers were being brought by both parents in a nice fancy car, turning up nice, warm and dry, and I was wet. So I think I felt that from an early age, but I think that voice as well, you can fall victim to it. And I think sometimes it comes down to what your mindset is like. Because, for example, you could use that voice as your energy to do better.
That's a lovely way of putting it.
That's something that I really, really try to do, and lean into that uncomfortable feeling and try and be better. I think I think I learned at an early age, fortunately, that you're the average of your group of friends, and if you surround yourself with people who you deem to be superior to you in class, for example, you might feel uncomfortable around them. But if you spend enough time rubbing shoulders with those people and matching them stride for stride, eventually you're going to come to a point in time where you do feel equal because you've been doing the same things for such a long time. And those feelings of those uncomfortable feelings, should I say, they do reside in my eyes.
So you quiet the voice, you quieten the voice.
Yeah, you quieten the voice, or you turn it up and use it as your energy. For me, I was always really embarrassed turning up with, I don't know, just turning up and feeling inferior to my groups of friends. And I always told myself that, if I can just match them, then one day I'll be equal.
Why were you, forgive me, I'm fascinated by your history now, Mickey. Why were you knocking about with kids from such a different background from yourself rather than knocking about with kids who were exactly like you?
Right, complicated story.
Well, you don't have to tell me if it's going to kind of...
No. So I grew up on a council estate on benefits. My mum was ill a lot of the time. So she wasn't able to provide the things that other people at school had. Okay. And I became friends with people from middle-class backgrounds when I moved at the age of about 14, 15. And suddenly I had friends at school. And it was a conscious decision to start fresh with a new group of friends and try something different. But I was struck by how much money they had, how big the houses were, what types of food they ate, and things like that. And I felt really inferior for a long time around them. And luckily, I stuck at it and I stuck in there. And I kept them as my friends because they did change my life.
And they pulled you
direction. Up. Yes, exactly.
That's really interesting because it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't made that move at 14. Probably you wouldn't have. Because also, and I don't think I'm allowed to say this. Well, I'm allowed to. I can say what I want, but I don't think I'm qualified to say this as opposed to you. I don't think there's as much looking down as people sometimes think there is.
I was just about to say. I was just about to say that as well. Yeah, I think that again comes from the way you present in the world and the way that you look at the world, rather than actually what is reality. Because one person's reality is going to be different to another, and we're all victims of our experience, aren't we? But I'm a teacher now. That's one thing that I do. But one thing I always try and teach my students is that there's more to this world than what you immediately see in your vicinity. And I think there's some really powerful messages like that but it's really difficult to get that over to my pupils or my nieces and nephews.
Is it hard? How long have you been teaching?
7 years.
Is it harder now than when you started? Easier or just the same?
I must say it is harder.
It's getting harder. I thought you were going to say
it is. It's something that I ask my colleagues at work. Is it harder now than it was 10 years ago? And they're always reluctant to say yes, but I can see that it is, and I can say from my own experience in the last 7 or 8 years, it is moving in a direction that makes things a little bit more tough. But I think society as a whole is shifting in a different direction.
Yes, and that's part of what he was talking about yesterday. So did you find it compelling then? You understood what he was talking about, obviously, because you have knowledge of the nagging voice, but the political feasibility of doing on a societal level what you did on a personal one.
Yeah, I didn't listen to his original statement yesterday. I only caught it because the way you presented what he said, it pricked my ears up. I was like, right, okay, so if James is talking about him complimentary, I've got to listen. So, yeah, it's difficult to say. It does hit home, but I think there's a really, really big, difficult task to shift society in a way where people think, do you know what, I can get out of the gutter. There's social mobility is a thing. I think that we're losing that.
Yeah,
I think we're losing that, and people are more confined to their own beliefs and their own systems a little bit more than perhaps what they used to be. People see it on Instagram and on the internet, and they read about these people, and they think, oh, that's way out of my league. I can never. And it's also a question of how difficult you want your life to be. Some people
how much struggle you want in it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I get that.
There's no easy way out of the gutter, and but it takes time, it takes effort, it takes persistence. And
everyone needs a little bit of help, probably, whether it's just help from the people around you or help from within, or, as you say, I love that idea of taking that voice and turning it into an inspiration rather than a kind of millstone. And you're a wonderful example of doing what you do. Can you tell when it works, Mickey, if you're with a youngster? And can you see it?
Can I tell when it works?
When you manage actually to make them see beyond their own expectations. Can you see it happen, or am I being I'm gone a bit Dead Poets Society?
No, I mean, there needs to be a long time elapsed to be able to accurately, determine whether something that you've said has changed that child's life. But you can see it short term in the way that they speak, the way they interact with others, the way they present. Certainly, you can see it within a number of years. If you're drilling into some certain students that they need to be more polite, be more considerate, you can definitely see changes within a couple of years. But once they leave school, it's not often that I have contact with them, so I can't. And that's a downside of being a secondary school teacher. Yeah. You can't always see where your work's ended up.
Aftercare.
I do speak to, but there's one student that left, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago. And I remember when I first started teaching, he was in year 9. And we had a really difficult time initially because he was the captain of the football team. He was a loud voice in the change room. He had a big ego and a big personality, and he was an academy footballer.
Right.
And in year 11, he found it really difficult managing his studies and also trying to gain a professional contract.
Yeah.
And he was from a working class area, Denton in Manchester, which I understand to be in the bottom 5% in terms of aspirations in the whole country.
Right.
And it didn't work out for him. And we spent a long time working through those emotions, talking about aspirations aside from football and things like that, and talking about how we needed to treat male and female members of staff and peers and the way he interacts with his parents and things like that. And I speak to him now, not very regularly, but I see him playing football for semi-professional teams. He's doing really well.
Yeah.
And I do interact with him from time to time. And the way he shows up in the world, I asked him to come and just observe a training session at school. And the way he turned up in his branded kit, in his Stockport County kit, he turned up and he was such a role model for the students that it made me really, really proud to say that I had some influence on his life. And so, and sometimes you do see that. And there are these other times where you can put all the effort in that you'd like to try and shape that young person's life, but they go home and they spend time around family members that are stuck.
Or worse, sticking them in reverse, or literally saying, don't be daft, that's not for the likes of you.
Exactly. It's like one step forward at school and then two steps back when they go home. And sometimes that's what us teachers are sadly up against.
Well, they're lucky to have you in their corner, mate. I hope you'll allow me to say that.
I appreciate that.
Well, it's not just me saying that. A lot of messages coming in. Here's one. This is a lovely, insightful call, says Matt. It's like a mini episode of Full Disclosure we should get. Without perhaps quite as much of your own background, although we got a bit of that as well. Thank you, Mickey, because I think you need sometimes to put yourself out there to help others, and that's clearly what the best teachers can do sometimes. It's 12:16.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 12. This is rather lovely. Nitin Sawhney, as you know, is an incredibly prolific and successful composer and musician, producer, DJ. And he's tweeted, he's listening today. Hi, Nitin. He says, listening to Mr. James O.B. right now on the radio, talking about class. I never had a sense of our class. My dad came to the UK with 50p in his pocket after being recruited by people, including Enoch Powell back in 1963, to work here. He and my mum worked hard to make our lives better, sacrificing so much for us. That is what I call pure class. And he adds, you can hear my dad's voice talking about his dream of coming here at the beginning of one of my tracks, The Immigrant. And I've retweeted that with Nitin's Spotify link to that track, which is a thing of beauty, but also pertinent to the conversation that we're having today, which is nice, really, because Marie in Brixton, who hopefully is on her way to a very successful job interview at the moment, reminded us of the interplay between class and ethnicity, and Nitin there coming at it from a rather different angle. When did you hear this voice in your head saying, no, it's not for you, you don't belong here, you can't do that? And what were you doing at the time? Claire's in Bradford. Claire, what would you like to say?
I think when you're growing up, James, it's almost like it's an unspoken. So when I left school, I wanted to be a social worker. My mum and dad said, no, that's not for people like us. But when the penny... so then I had a daughter when I was 19, and I taught her to read when she was 3 because I recognised really early this was almost a way out. And she got into a selective grammar school and did really, really well. She's done really, really well. But then in 2012, my mum died. Really suddenly, 63 she was.
Oh, dear.
And she said... And when she died, for about 18 months after, I looked back and I thought I couldn't, even though we had loads of laughs and happy memories, the thing that stuck with me was her regrets. And the two things she always wanted to do were, 1, learn to drive,
right,
and 2, open a cleaning company, which in our network, we didn't have anybody who could help her do that. And
start a business and do the books and all that kind of thing.
And do all those things that we would need to get it off the ground. So it was just one of those things that we put back and said, well, we'll do it later. But then later didn't come. So I decided then, I was a school governor at a school and there were some young kids, and I was saying to the teachers, what else can we do with these families? And I was saying, but look at the families, we can't do much.
Yeah.
And I thought, right, I'm going to change this. I'm going to go to university. I'm going to change this. I'm going to change the system. Why are people like us always left on the back burner? Why can't we do something a bit more? So I did, James. I did my GCSEs. I went then to university on a foundation year, did an undergraduate, a master's, nearly finished my PhD. And a month ago, I returned to the same elite institution, and I'm now a lecturer, to bring those people like me up and be the person that I had when I was at uni. And yes, you do get "Oh, you're quite articulate." Well, why wouldn't I be?
Yes.
Your accent, the way you look. So we're older as well, James. But
Yes.
those young people who are born into privilege are no different to us. They're just born into that. That's all they know. Like this is all we know. And I think we've got to look for good and value in everyone. And when I got my personal tutor, she used to give me opportunities, and I'd say, "What if I can't?" She'd say, "Well, I won't give you it if I didn't think you could."
Gosh.
And so I got opportunity after opportunity within this elite institution where I do still check, what am I wearing?
And you don't look like the people, or sound like a lot of the people around you. So what's the answer then? I appreciate it's probably bigger than a PhD, but when you said, why do people like us not?
Well, we always then, James, we have to flip that. Why do some people walk with the head up, but some people are unspokenly told to keep the head down?
Yeah.
Are some voices worth more than others?
Oh.
And I think the answer is always. If you look at Jacob Rees-Mogg,
yeah,
I could probably beat Jacob Rees-Mogg in many intellectual arguments.
Claire, you could beat him in an arm wrestle.
But he'll always win, James, because he's got the power and the money behind him.
Yes.
And what working class people do is they often they have to accept, because there are few choices to move forward. They have things done to them. They're not the people doing things. They're not the decision makers.
So what did you hear when I played that clip of Keir Starmer, or when you were listening to the speech yesterday, if you were? What did you hear?
A little bit of hope, because it feels like Keir Starmer, I've got to say, I've been one of those, because I was a Labour Party member, then I wasn't, and I thought, is he convincing me? But what we need more than anything in this country is people to get something other than those at the top. Because we give this myth out of meritocracy. Oh, well, if you work hard, you'll get it. Yeah. You have to work doubly hard, and it's timing, James. And my motivation was that when the day comes that I leave this earth, my 3 girls can say, my mum tried. She did everything she could. And now we can do that, because one of my girls said, how do you do this, Mum? How do you stand in front of all those people? And I'm scared, James, because my accent's different. But I know what I'm talking about. But it's other people. And I would say what we would say in Godhood, posh folk who've said, you know what, you are good enough. And by when we say we pull up the ladder behind us, most people don't see a ladder. It's like a full-time job being poor and having a little hope. It's tiring, and we forget the emotion in that. So if you can't see it, it's not a choice. It is no choice.
It is, isn't it? It's about you can talk about doors in front of you, but sometimes there's only one door. You're literally not aware. It's a bit like what Mickey was talking about in Manchester, with some of the people he teaches, just not thinking that avenue exists. Never mind that avenue would admit them or allow them through. It's a bit like, I think it is at least, that when your daughters ask you that, you're saying to them, but I have as much right to be at that lectern, on that stage, as anybody else in the college or in the whole of academia. I have at least as much right to be there. And arguably, as with Marie, because of where you started, you've achieved more to get to where you are than people who started 100 yards down the track in front of you.
You have to, Jim. So
I know you do. I do understand that.
And you saw my CV, and then you met me. If you ask me one question at interview, I assume you want one answer. As a working class person, I'm going to give you 3 examples, because I've always got to double prove that I'm good enough. And that's done. And then afterwards you think, why did I give 3 answers? But we're double proving.
What's it like when you find yourself teaching people who have got a very well-developed sense of entitlement? How do you deal with that?
Do you know what, Jen?
What?
I literally see good in everyone. I once had a student say to me, Claire, do poor people have a doctor? And I said, what do you mean? And well, in our village, there's about, a really small village, and my dad's best friend is our doctor. why on earth would he know that you have to queue for 3 days to get an appointment? And it's not his fault, James, and he was one of the kindest people I've ever met. And I think we've got to stop this, them and us, because for every privilege somebody has in their life, there will be something else missing. I were really blessed that I had my mum at home all the time. If my mum had had an amazing career,
she wouldn't have been there. So swings and roundabouts on that front. But in terms of horizons, I'll tell you what, Claire, I'll take a lot away from what you've told me. But I think what I'll take away most, with your permission, is the poignancy of your mum's legacy, being a legacy of happiness, as you stressed, that you laughed a lot together, but her having a sense of regret at the end of her days.
And I think this is the thing about social mobility, James. I think on paper now, I would tick all those middle class boxes. But if I say to you, James, I'm now middle class, then I have to say I'm ashamed of where I come from.
Oh, that's part of the problem.
Behind, haven't I?
Yes, that is part of the problem, isn't it? In that somehow it's a holding position or it's a starting block. It's not. It's an identity as well. But that's why I loved what Starmer said yesterday, because it's the voice that defines what he uses, not the accoutrements or even the status. So you could have made a ton of money, or you could have achieved great things in academia like you, but the consciousness of the voice. A lot of the lads I went to school with don't know that voice exists.
No, and it's not. But the thing is with it, James. You can't say, "Oh, well, why would you know?" Why would they know? Why would they?
Yeah, well, you're very generous, and I think you have to be. Otherwise, you're going to entrench the divisions and the fissures, because you're blaming that other person for the circumstances of their birth, albeit that they were, what's the word I'm looking for, more privileged, but they've got no more responsibility for the circumstances of their birth or the consequences of their nurture than anybody else has. Claire, thank you. I'm cracking on only because it's time for the news, which Lottie Morley is here with now.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:35 is the time, and a couple of you asking to carry on this conversation because it is rather uplifting, perhaps, compared to some of the stuff, well, the most obvious stuff that we've been talking about for 5 of the 9 hours that we've spent together this week. So, yeah, I completely agree. I was going to talk about the maths element of Starmer's speech, but I'm not sure we will now. 12:35 is the time. Gabby's at Heathrow. Gabby, what made you pick up the phone?
I picked up because it was definitely, the voice has affected every facet of my life, I think.
Go on.
I'm like you. I went to a grammar school, but I had to do the entrance exam in the 11 plus. And coming from a working class single mother family, I couldn't afford tuition, so my mum pushed me to work from the books. And then the transition, actually getting in was an achievement. And I thought, wow, okay, I'm fine, I'm set. But the transition from a public primary school in a sort of deprived area to a grammar school in a very, very, affluent area,
yes,
it debilitated me, because I get there and I'm faced and shown these people that have been in tuition since they were 8 years old, have both of their parents working full-time jobs. I go to their house, I'm seeing these big mansions, and it's like, wow. And even in terms of academic prowess, I always felt like I was behind. I'm not a bad student in any case, but I just felt inadequate. And I was very aware of my class at a young age as soon as I got to that grammar school. And that voice kind of got louder when I got to A-levels. I apologise if you hear any sound outside of me.
Why? It's not your fault.
The voice sort of got louder when I got to A-levels. When I decided to ignore, okay, I'm a black girl, my grades are good, but they're not A star, A star, A star.
Sure.
Let me sign up to this called St. Andrews. At first, I didn't know that. Well, I kind of forgot that Prince William and Princess Kate went there.
Yeah.
But when I went to St. Andrews, I saw the course and I loved it. And I thought, wow, this university is beautiful.
Yes.
This course is, for me, I want to go. And when I would tell people, they'd be like, oh, that school is very, very affluent. Are you sure? Are you sure? And it's not like they were trying to hurt me, but that voice that you were talking about, they were sort of trying to awaken the thing that I ignored, to take the step to
this is you won't belong there, is what you were hearing.
Yeah. And I felt that.
Because it's a posh school, isn't it? It's regarded as a posh college, as you mentioned that Prince William went there. But so what happened? I just want to know, actually, out of curiosity. Did you go? Did you apply?
I applied and I didn't get in. And with UCAS, you know that they don't know your race, they don't know anything.
Okay.
But when you've been told that, oh, you don't really belong there.
I'm sorry.
In so many words.
Yes.
It felt like, okay, did I get in on my merit? Did I not get in on my merit? Like, because I'm not good enough, and that would be fine? Or is it because of something else? Like, they see that you're school. But I think in my personal statement, I did talk about the fact that I did some journalistic work for a Black Creators event, and how one of the books talked about my culture, and I added that into my personal statement. Not to, like, cry about it, but because
it's your personal statement. It's literally personal, and you wanted to express it.
Yeah, it's personal.
Yeah.
Like, I can't take away from the fact that I am a black girl. Like, I wrote that in, not thinking about it. And there was just a voice in me that said, you shouldn't have wrote that. You shouldn't have wrote that. That's why they sent it down. They're so posh, they're white, they got everything. Like, that's why they don't want you there. I mean, you couldn't fit in there anyway. Like, what would have happened to you? You would have been miserable. Because in grammar school, I started to become miserable as the older I got, because I could really see the differences in every facet of life. Like, for instance, we were talking about supermarkets. Like, something as trivial as supermarkets. I said I go to Tesco and Lidl. And then my friend said they get Ocado. Like, I've never been able to... Like, there's nothing...
So you're describing the bizarre sense of looking at things that you know you can't change.
Yeah.
And the voice in your head saying, because you can't change them, you shouldn't try to go to places where you don't belong.
Exactly, but I tried to ignore that because...
You've done a pretty good job of ignoring it, I think, Gabby.
Yeah, my mum is a big proponent in my life where it's like, she told me that I could do anything. She told me that you are smart, you are capable, you can do this. And I believed it up until a point where I was spaced to look myself in the mirror and say, oh my God, am I actually good enough?
Well, you are good enough. You are good enough, but there will be obstacles that you have to negotiate that other people won't. And there's two things that occur to me listening to you. The first is the absolute clarity of what you've described. But the second is a bit of an odd one, because when you mentioned, because I went to a public school, I went to a smarter school than you did, and it cost a lot of money, and my parents couldn't really afford it, but they cancelled Netflix and gave up avocados for toast, and thankfully they were able to scrape together the school fees. But when I started on Fleet Street, I was out for dinner with a bunch of other gossip columnists, or diarists as we called ourselves, and they'd all been to schools like mine, and then it came time to pay the bill. And we all put our cards on the table. You know, we all put our cards in the little dish to pay for dinner. And the waiter comes and pulls his cards out, and he starts talking about things I've never heard of. He starts saying, "Who's is the Coots? Who's Coots' card?" And the chap next to me goes, "Oh, that's mine." And he signs away. And then it's Fleming's and Barings and all these sort of private banks. And then he got to the second last card, and he went, "And who's with the Halifax?" And everyone started laughing around the table, and I had a bit like you with a card though. I had no, and yet I'm doing it in a context that is, you know, even more elevated, allegedly elevated, supposedly elevated. So I think that can happen almost anywhere. And the trick is, I wasn't tough enough at 23 to laugh it off. Otherwise, I wouldn't still remember it now. But the trick is to recognise that it doesn't really matter at all. And the people to whom it matters are the people desperately trying to cling on to some sort of unearned status, which they perceive as superiority. Where did you apply? Did you go? Have you gone to university?
No, I'm doing a gap year right now.
But are you going to go next year?
Well, basically, another terms of
go on
the voice in my head.
Yeah,
I want to get into publishing, which is notoriously for the white middle class, right?
Yeah.
And it's really based on who you know. And I was just looking at the analytics for it. And going to school to study English, comparative literature, publishing, whatever, people are still not getting jobs because they don't have the experience / the education. So I was like, do you know what? Right. Let me do an apprenticeship. Let me do a publishing apprenticeship to get my foot in the door. And you know what? If I can't get one this year, by May, I'll go back to school because my grades were good enough for me to go back. And it's definitely been an eye-opener of, like, any path that you get, you will, as you said, you will get those obstacles. It's just you sort of quieting that voice to continue. It's the perseverance. It sounds cheesy, but the perseverance of it, because I did do an interview at apprenticeship and I got to the final stage and I didn't get it. And it's the fact that I have to continue, because honestly, as a working class person, I can't afford not to continue. I can't afford to be crippled by my race or my gender or my sex. I just have to keep going. Like, I have to, you know? So
yes, I do know. I didn't know they were publishing apprenticeships. And that is one of those sort of alternatives to a pure academic degree paths, is it? That I've been reading about and hearing about. So it's both a qualification and a start in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, listen, I've got a publisher, so I don't know if they've got apprenticeships, but I can almost certainly sort out some sort of work experience if that would be helpful to you.
That I would be eternally grateful.
Well,
Thank
just
you so much.
leave your details with Eleanor, and I'll email you and I'll speak to them, because I'm going to be in touch with them quite a lot. I've got a book out on November the 2nd, so I think they owe me at the moment. Let's just hope
James, I might cry, please.
Don't be soft. You deserve it. But if the book does well, then I can demand that they give you work experience.
Wow.
And if it doesn't, I can ask.
Wow.
All right.
You know.
So no promises, but I'll definitely put it out there and see what happens. Because I've spoken to you for quite a long time. I think they'd be lucky to have you in the office for a while. All right.
Thank you, James.
You take care, Gabby. All right. Stay safe.
Take care, James.
And just to stress, a couple of people from St Andrews getting in touch. Gabby was talking about her inner voice telling her things. She wasn't saying that St Andrews is it was her fear that it might have been her background. So I shall read this out. That was a horrific misrepresentation of St Andrews University. It wasn't, though. It was a very, very accurate representation of what this voice sounds like. And you, like me, probably never hear that voice. My son went there. He came from nothing. The school is extremely multicultural with many students of colour. And that is true as well. But that's what her voice was telling her. And the voice doesn't tell you the truth. That's the whole point about the voice. When it says this isn't for you, you don't belong here, you can't do that. It's not telling you the truth. So I'm happy to clarify that on her behalf. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Lee says, your diarist mates were right tight asses. They had Coots cards and didn't pay for dinner. It's a very good point, actually. Sam writes from Kent, when I walk into M&S Food, I feel like a total fake. And I'm convinced that people know it. I love it. I think this is Idiot's Corner. Perhaps, maybe I'm doing you a disservice. Growing up, Keir Starmer learnt to play 4 musical instruments and attended the Guildhall School of Music's junior programme. He sounds quite middle class to me. That breaks my heart, actually. Not Idiot's Corner. Heartbreak House instead, because playing a musical instrument should not be a sign of privilege. But depending, of course, on what the instrument is, it's probably rather harder to take up the euphonium than it is the recorder, but still, there it is. And Nikki in Cheltenham has a nice phrase. She says, privilege is the absence of inconvenience. Loads of messages on this, actually. One day I might do a show without taking any calls. I'll just do it all from text and tweets. I had that voice, James, writes, I nearly said your name, and you've said, please keep me anonymous, when an ex-girlfriend of mine got into Cambridge University about 14 years ago. Visiting her up there and meeting all the people she was now surrounded by was heartbreaking. I lived in one of the most deprived areas on the south coast, and I just couldn't take it. We eventually had to part as I couldn't afford to visit, and I felt like I didn't belong with her new world. It's an astonishing testimony from someone from a similar background to you, arriving at Oxford for their interviews, and on the night before their interviews, bumping into a man called Boris Johnson in the college bar, and what followed was frankly remarkable. I tell the story actually in the book I was just referring to there. 12:50 is the time. Michael is in Bethgelert in North Wales. Michael, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
It's Bethgelert.
Oh, that's what I said.
Yes, it's close enough. I'm English, so I'm not very good with the Welsh accents. But
no.
Yes, my story starts at school. I remember lining up in the corridor of my comprehensive school, waiting to go into the careers advice one by one. And I walked in, sat down at the desk, and they asked me what I wanted to be. And I said, an architect.
Yeah.
And they looked at me and said, don't be silly.
Really?
Yeah, they were like, you're working class.
Did they use that phrase? Did they say that? Working class people can't be architects.
They were like, you're working class. Your dad is a truck driver.
So that voice wasn't in your head then. It was in your careers advisor's office.
That was the first experience I ever had of realising I was different to other people. I grew up in Shropshire in a very, very rural community. Me and my friends, we didn't understand class in those days. And being told that I couldn't follow my chosen career was kind of really weird. It was almost sort of painful.
Yes, of course
sort it was. And, going away and realising it, and they were like, no, you, we've got apprenticeships in a building yard, this and that, and I did speak.
So we're losing the phone line, Michael. So what happened next? What did you do with your life, really?
I went into welding. They told me that
Can't do it, mate. Sorry, phone line's too bad. Not your fault. Not my fault. Nobody's fault. Just one of those things. 12:52 is the time. Privilege is the absence of barriers faced by others. It is, and Petrina points out that the colliery bands might dispute that playing a musical instrument is a sign of privilege, but they're a thing of the past as well, although fair play for the joke. Petrina writes, that comment made me quite brassed off. Very nicely done. Wow, James, this subject is like a therapy session. I'm from the Wirral. I was born in 1974. My secondary school had the 11 plus, but people of my background didn't even consider it. We were expected to work in more practical careers, non-academic or in factory jobs. This is where Starmer is at his most authentic, and until yesterday he hadn't managed to communicate it about his dad's sense of... I'm speaking now, I'll carry on reading it in a minute. His dad's sense of, or even his own sense of his dad's apparent inferiority as a consequence of his dad working with his hands when he ended up at a school where almost all of the dads would have worked with their brains, if for want of a better word. I know you need to use your brains to use your hands, but don't get bogged down in my analogies. Wearing a suit to work is a good way of putting it. A council house provided my parents with the means to save and buy me my first computer, which became my future career. It even gave them the opportunity to try and purchase a house of their own. And then the story goes on about space being important for children rather than wealth, stability. These are what you might think of as middle class attributes. Thank you for that. 12:54 is the time. And Stuart's in Shrewsbury. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I got quite emotional, actually, when I first heard you talking about it this morning.
Yeah, a lot of people have, actually, looking at the inbox.
Yeah, so hopefully I don't get emotional as I talk.
Well,
but
feel free. You'll be in good company, Stuart.
So I'm 41 now. I have what you consider quite a privileged life, I guess. I'm middle class. I would, in those terms, I'm not. I grew up working class. I grew up with very little. I grew up in Handsworth in Birmingham. I didn't know I didn't have a lot, but it was kind of one Christmas present at Christmas, that kind of thing. Anyway, that's a different thing.
Yeah.
I fought very hard, I think, throughout most of my life. In one way or another, I felt, whether it was someone mentioned earlier, it was sort of societal, and in some cases it was, in a weird way, the people I grew up with, even when they didn't mean to, there was a sense that you couldn't go a certain distance.
Yeah.
There were certain jobs or certain careers, the idea of going to university was never spoken about. Someone mentioned previously about 11 plus, my mum was like, what's the point of even, I don't think we even considered it.
Yeah.
Then my first senior school, the choice to go to that, there was no choice, there was no thought. It was, you go from that school
to
that school. And I sat in classrooms where people were shouting and fighting. And I remember one day in year 9, a teacher came in, sat down and started reading a book rather than teach us. And I remember thinking, I'm effed.
Yeah.
I don't know, I can't, I've got to do something.
They were reading it out loud, just to clarify. They weren't just sitting there reading it to themselves while you got on with stuff.
No, to themselves, yeah. They were reading it to themselves.
Just not even pretending to engage with the class.
Not anymore, yeah. And,
wow.
I just thought, this is too much. I need to do something.
Right.
So I walked, one evening, I walked past my old primary school, and I saw a light on in the window, and it was my old teacher sitting in there doing some classwork.
Yeah.
And I went in, and I sat there, and I cried, and I just said, I can't do this. And he spoke to a school, which was in Great Bath, so it was 2 bus rides away. It was a good hour and a half away on buses. And he helped me and my mom get me a place in that school. And that was the first time, and it was a good school.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't like the best school in the world or anything, but it was a good school. And
the teachers taught. The teachers taught,
and I finally realised that sometimes you have to do things for yourself, and you can't expect it. And I then pushed myself. I started to think, what do I want to do? I want to work in graphic design. I want to be a designer. I went to a great college, St Caulfield College. I did a design course. I pushed myself, but I had a weird accent. People took the mick out of me. I didn't purposely change my accent, but it just changed over time.
Sure.
But anyway, just to flash forward.
Yeah.
There were several points in my life where I've learned lessons about privilege. I definitely have privilege now, and I try to teach my kids. In a weird way, being working class means that, or growing up working class means that I understand the difficulties that other people have. And I have.
Do you still?
We're
going to run out of time, which is a shame.
Sorry.
I wish you'd got on earlier. No, it's not your fault. Do you still hear the voice ever? Is the voice still there?
All the time.
Really? Why?
Not as frequent.
Oh, sure.
But I'm at the moment.
Not that voice. I didn't mean that voice, Stuart.
No, I'm sorry.
No, don't be silly. That's lovely. That's really lovely.
One of the things was.
Go on. You're a little bit distracted, so you don't need to say anything.
He's got a drink.
Okay.
I stood outside when I was in my early 20s, 20 years ago. I was working in London for the first time. I stood outside a hotel, very posh hotel, for half an hour thinking, I was meeting friends there for drinks, and I didn't know how to go into that hotel. Yeah. I was so scared, and I don't, it sounds so stupid now, but I walked in, finally, and the people I was meeting, there was a woman I worked with who was in her 60s, and she said, if you can pay for a drink here, you're allowed to come in.
Beautiful.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And ever since that point, I've always thought about things like that. I then applied for jobs that I thought
it's about the right to be.
I'm going to go for it,
mate. You've taken me over time, but I'm glad. No, don't stop apologising. It was my decision. I don't have to let you do that. I just have to incur the wrath of Fogarty. That's all. Which
horrible misrepresentation.
Will you do me a little favour, Stuart?
Yes.
Go and give that child a cuddle.
Oh, I'm cuddling him right now.
I thought you might be. It's coming up to 1 o'clock. I'm glad that we got that. As close as we could to the conclusion. If you did miss any of today's show, and it was quite special in many places, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, Rewind Live Radio, or enjoy the whole show podcast. You'll find all of LBC shows to catch up on, as well as all the best video clips from LBC. Rewind Live Radio on Global Player. Download for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you very much, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.